Us. Today marks 26 years since Reconciliation Day was established back in 1994. That was to mark the end of apartheid. In his weekly newsletter, President Cyril Ramaphosa used the popular hashtag I'm Staying, which is part of a Facebook group, to inspire South Africans to embrace reconciliation. The president urging South Africans to learn another's languages to try and bridge the racial divide in the country. Joining us now to discuss this and interact, of course, friends, colleagues, neighbors, how we can enhance these relations is Father Michael Lapsley, and he's from the Institute of Healing of Memories. Father, thank you very much once again for your time. Hopefully we can hear each other this time around. In your view, 26 years on, where would you put South Africa's race relations?
Well, I think in the first years we traveled a great distance towards reconciliations. But I think we have in some ways in the last few years gone backwards. Our national politics have not helped us because they tend to emphasize a very narrow kind of nationalism, where I think in the Mandela years particularly, there was an emphasis on inclusivity. But I think it's partly the failure of our government to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has also in some ways stalled the process of national reconciliation. But I'm glad that the president referenced the hashtag I'm Staying, because that shows that in civil society there and across the country, there are still many examples of South Africans reaching out to each other and finding each other. But I think we have to always see the relationship between healing, reconciliation, and justice. And our project of national healing and reconciliation will fail if we don't transform our society, if we don't deal with the depth of inequality that characterizes us today.
Father, I'm glad you use the president as an example, because I want to quote him stemming from that letter that he posts every Monday through his desk. And he says that equally important to acknowledge is just how vastly different our country is today to what it was 26 years ago. For every negative story of racism that makes the news, there are countless other positive stories of racial integration, communities living in harmony and social cohesion that do not generate headlines. You agree with the president?
I agree completely. And media doesn't thrive. We don't sell newspapers on good news stories. So we don't sufficiently lift up the stories of reconciliation, of kindness, of generosity. But I think other movements within the country, I think the actions of South Africans against corruption has a non-racial character, where South Africans are fighting each other, but also in the work against violence against women and children. Again, it has in some ways a non-racial character. There are people of all races involved in that. So I think there are, and another incredibly important movement, the movement for climate justice. So I think young people particularly find each other, but it's in a common commitment to justice. And those are the signs of hope for reconciliation. I think when we hear each other's stories, hear each other's pain, and experience our common humanity, that can deepen a commitment to working for the kind of transformation we need. So reconciliation is not something static at all. It is something very dynamic, and we have to be very deliberative about it if we're going to indeed be a nation at peace with itself. But I think in many ways we are still a traumatized nation, that the pain of generations, and particularly to people of color, still haunts our generation.
Yeah.
But of course, inequality is one of the most serious problems we have.
Yeah. Well, Father, I suppose one of the questions we've got to ask is, where do we go wrong? Or at some point, someone described it and said, whenever there are issues of hardship in the country, that's where you see these flare-ups of racial intolerance. And I speak here with Brackenfell in mind, for example, which is the latest example of what one would call racial intolerance, where certain kids decided to go to a matric dance, and it was alleged, it was said that there were no black children at that matric dance, and that some teachers actually even attended. Where do we fall short in trying to bring back that which the father, or the father of the nation, Nelson Mandela, tried to foster when he came into office in 1994?
Well, I suppose in a way, President Ramaphosa was trying to address that in the letter when he talked about us learning another language other than our own, and creating the spaces where people can appreciate each other. But I think it starts in the home. It's part of the role of the nursery school, of the primary school, of the secondary school, of the university. But I think we also need leaders with moral vision that we can live together. And I think we saw that with Nelson Mandela. We saw, and we've seen it with President Ramaphosa, but there was an in-between part where we were not seeing a commitment towards national reconciliation. So I think it's also the widespread corruption then leads to cynicism about the national project. So I think there are a number of factors at play, but I think also the future doesn't belong to the state. It belongs to every one of us. And I actually do believe that most South Africans believe we can live together, but we can't live together in peace unless we deal with inequality.
Yeah. Finally, Father, the role of churches. I prompted it earlier as we were starting our discussion, and the central role you played as church leaders in bringing down apartheid. What do you believe could be your role this time around to try and foster more warmly relations between the races in this country?
Well, it's not just the churches, it's all faith communities. It's equally the mosque and the temple. But I think we as faith leaders need to model reconciliation. People need to see us reaching out to one another and acting both for reconciliation and justice. And it's, by our actions that we will be judged. That's where people will be inspired. But also how we speak about the other, whether we speak with reverence and respect to each other, racially, religiously, and every other way, will inspire. And the way we as leaders hold up the stories of people acting with generosity and kindness towards people of other communities, but also acting with generosity.
Father Michael Lapsley, I thank you very much for your time. He's with the Institute for Healing Memories. Thanks indeed for your contribution this morning.